Right. When I was getting a lift to the airport by my partner at some ungodly hour this morning, I tried to explain what it was I was going to do today. I occasionally try to explain what it is I do. And she said, that long for questions, there's going to be a lot of rotten fruit. And I'm the last one up, so clearly I might be getting it. I'm kind of approaching this from a kind of, I guess, schizophrenic point of view. I'm a librarian. I manage the budget. I manage the serials budget, or the whole budget. I also manage the APC budget. I manage the repository. I also manage the University Press at Huddersfield. And I'll forgive you if you've not heard of us. I'm also a researcher who publishes and who consumes research. So I'm kind of coming at this from all angles. But what I've done is I looked at the abstract, as we all did, and I'm sorry, we're giving the abstract a bit of stick here, but I kept getting annoyed, and then I calmed down, and then I got annoyed again when I read the abstract, so I've got a few things to say on that. Really, I think it's all a little confused, and I think the customers as competitors bit is a bit confused. I pulled out 3 bits from the abstract. I'm not going to mention the first bit about tech-savvy authors are self-publishing, because quite frankly, if they are, then they've just taken us both out of the equation anyway. What I'm going to look at is libraries are publishing, and actually first, the statement, full-text final versions in repositories, deliberately shifting usage. That's an interesting one for me, and I've got a few things to say, and I hope it will be of use. But first of all, are we not missing the point a little bit? The bit about shifting usage, when I try to cancel a journal, and I do occasionally, I'm always told, well, don't look at the usage, it's far more important. And yet we've got statements here about we're taking usage. So that's a little bit confusing to me. What is more important? Is it the usage on your journal platform, or is it actually the impact of the research? What is more important? I would argue, yeah, they're both fairly important, but maybe the impact of the research hopefully sells content. And my argument on that is, for repositories, that multiple access points only really help you to disseminate the research more, greater impact, hopefully with a brand there as well. So I think, I want to be a little controversial, but I also think, that repositories aren't all that bad. They may well be helping, and I hope to show you that in a second. And the bit about I loved the bit about stealing your lunch. It's a very nice lunch, by the way. The thing is, if the final version is in the university repository, and it's a gold open access one, we do own it. We did pay you for it. If it's a green version and you've given us permission and there may be an embargo, we've reached an agreement on it. We're not stealing anything. We're paying you money. So I would argue that you've probably had your lunch. The other thing, though, is that if it's a hybrid journal, and Jill's touched on this as well, and we're also paying for a subscription to that hybrid journal, we're not only giving you your lunch, we're also giving you your cake and actually letting you eat it as well. So, yeah, I think the bit about we're taking stuff from you sort of hurts a little, I think, from our point of view. More importantly, we have done it legally. We have got permission to do this. Like I say, if it's gold open access, we've paid for that right to do it. Linking to your platform, we're more than happy to do so. So when we add the stuff, we will make sure, especially if there's a DOI, and please for those of you that don't, please start putting DOIs in because we can't link. But we'll link to it and hopefully we'll drive your usage. We always tell our researchers to cite the published version. Quite often they're coming to us, having a look, and then going to the published version. So, we are doing this properly. Actually, one thing to say on that, and I deliberately didn't put it on there, but we're not ResearchGate. I have a lot of conversations with faculty about, so it's okay to put the published version in ResearchGate. We always say no, but it's okay to put it in the repository if we've got permission. Just to really annoy you as well, why is the platform so important? If you have a lot of us on advisory boards, we've been telling you for quite a long time not to do really flashy, clever platforms. Don't spend your money on doing things that flash and move around and also don't work on a mobile. Researchers want stuff, and they don't necessarily care at that point where that stuff is. So if it's on a repository, they will consume it. It's just as good at that point. Now, of course, when the researchers are publishing, they do care. But I think as consumers, they don't always. And there's plenty of research out there to say that. But I think, again, there are opportunities here. It's not all threats. Now, luckily, no one in the room will be able to actually read this slide because I've realised I didn't ask permission from the publisher to put up some usage stats there. But actually, it's 4 years old anyway. But I think this was an opportunity. We're talking back in 2010 and the Pyrus project, and Huddersfield were very fortunate to be on there. I think we were on there with Cambridge, Southampton and Harvard. There you go. But this is some real data that I pulled out from Pyrus from 4 years ago. And just really to push this point through, what I've actually chosen is a librarian journal, and the paper was published by a colleague of mine, which means I don't actually have to ask him. He'll let me anyway. But that is a list of a year's worth of stats, and for those of you at the front that can read it, and you can look at the numbers, I think about 2/3 of the usage, and forgive me if not everybody remembers what Pyrus was, but we're talking counter-level stats for articles. About 2/3 of the usage in that year came from our repository and not from the journal. Now, this is an interesting one. Okay, so it's librarianship, it might not be nuclear physics, but it's there. But I think the thing from that is, actually, a lot of us consumers of library research don't subscribe to the library journals because we can't really justify the expenditure on library journals if our engineers can't get anything. But that's an example. We're driving usage on that. We've got 2/3 of the usage in that year. Also, moving forward, and this is the same article 4 years on. We're part of Irish UK, so that's the institutional repository usage stats, and so it's counter data for article level stuff. It's a rich source of information. This particular journal is Library High Tech News. I deliberately chose it because it is a professional society journal. So it's backed by IFLA. I had a look on the publisher site. I couldn't find any information at all, but what you can get from our site, the repository site, is we will tell you what those counter stats are. So this, my colleague is still getting usage. It may only be 5 or 10 articles, but 4 or 5 years on, that's not bad. We are telling everybody it's cited in Scopus 11 times. I couldn't find that on the publisher website. I'd argue we're adding the value here, although we've just said we don't like adding value. But, it's in there. And if we are, and I know I'm making some large steps here, but if we're driving, say, 2/3 of that usage, and if there's 11 citations in Scopus, I wonder how many of those citations came from people reading the repository version. And I wonder who benefits from the fact that that's a reasonably well-cited article. Hopefully it's the publisher, because the publisher will say, look how well we're cited. Look at our impact factor or whatever. So again, it's, there's a partnership here. The other thing we say, by the way, is the country of download. Just to show that we are, in this particular case, we've got people all over the world. And again, I guarantee those people can't afford or can't get to that particular journal. So again, there's something we're doing there, and I think this touches on things we've said before. Right, moving very quickly, the second bit, which is very quick. Scholarly publishing in the library. I don't like library as publishers. It does make us sound particularly amateur. I'm not saying we're the most professional outfit out there, but I think we're better than that. There's a lot going on in the States. I think we're behind the US and well, North America, I should say, in this case, but it's growing. Like I say, you may not have heard of us. You'll have heard of UCL. We've got Ubiquity picking up quite a number of university presses at the moment. Just to give us as a quick example, again, we're not necessarily trying to compete with you. You could see us actually as helping to grow the author pool. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing it. We want our young researchers and undergrads to be able to publish. A very quick example. This is something we published in, I think it was October last year, and it's an open access monograph, our first. If I was here in a few months, I'd tell you what we did in the ref, because it did get submitted as one of the major ref outputs for 2 researchers. It's very similar, actually, to the Ottawa picture. I didn't know what the business model was, but it's virtually the same one for us. It's about £3,000 to £5,000 per book, and it's either paid for by the library or, in the case of this, by the music department's research budget. We've got other examples of Leave a Hume Money, Heritage Lottery Fund, lots of different ones. With this one, though, we've sold 100 copies in 6 months, which we think is quite good. That's actually paid for a second print run. But this is, again, you might not be able to see it properly, but this is the usage data. And again, it's counter data. It lives in the repository, the book. And we've had 1,400 full-text downloads of that title, which, you know, we're pretty pleased with. So we might be a small operation, but 1,400 people have clearly heard of us and have downloaded the book. On top of that as well, we are a journals publisher. We've got 6 journals at the moment, all open access. We've got another 2, and there they are, coming in the next 6 months, and another 2 in the pipeline. Again, these are mostly growing the pool of authors, growing the researchers who are publishing. These particular 2, Postgraduate Perspectives in History, is a postgraduate journal. It's based around what I think is the 2nd biggest postgraduate history conference in the UK. We published that. And Fields is interesting. It's an undergraduate journal, extremely rigorously peer-reviewed, I must say. They've got to get through, I think, 3 panels to even be considered, and then peer-reviewed at the end of it. It's a serious attempt at an undergraduate journal. So we are, you know, we're putting stuff out there, and this is all through the repository. I've got to say, though, you know, potentially as well, we are actually, and the 2 that are in the pipeline that I can't talk about, our societies, charities, research institutes are actually coming to us and saying, we'd like to publish open access, we'd like to do it through a library, we think it's a good thing. So we are potentially picking some further titles up. Just to finish, and I've borrowed this from what is now 4-year-old OAPEN report and changed it slightly. I guess I'm stating the obvious. This is a professional industry. As Jill said, you've got to adapt to changes in scholarly practice. You have to adapt to the needs of the community. I'm kind of getting back at the abstract here. You need to think about the role you're fulfilling. It's change management. Things are happening. You know, like I say, we're getting people coming to us and saying, we'd like to publish with you. We all have to deal with that. We're adapting to our market by doing that, by having a press, by having a repository. I see us more as contributors, not customers. And I see you as contributors as well, and I think it's a partnership thing. But you have to adapt. I think that's it from me. Thanks.
Questions for Grant? Yes, Charles.
So my name's Charles Watkinson. I'm from University of Michigan Libraries. Looking at the title of this whole session, customers as competitors. If I was in the States, it would be a very different sort of session because, as you referred to, Graham, I mean, there are now 60 research libraries in a library publishing coalition. 80% of ARL libraries now actually have publishing operations. Last year there were probably about 425 journals published by mostly US libraries, over 1,000 monographs, things like that. Why has library publishing in the library been so slow to take off in the UK?
God, that's a good question. I don't know. It's not often I think we trail behind that much in the UK. I'm looking over there at North America. But yeah, it has been slow. I think we're getting there. I think actually it's moving really fast now. I should say, when we've been doing this for 4 years, it's small scale, but 8 journals, that's not bad. There are others looking at what we're doing. UCL, obviously, far bigger than us, but UCL are doing it. There's lots of people are suddenly taking notice. I think ubiquity is going to move things on a lot more. There are a lot of people out there sort of looking at it. Yeah, I don't know why it's been slow to catch on. I think maybe one of the things that's helping now is the fact that we have the Research Council mandates and HEFGE mandates, and that's focused everybody's mind. And I think I'd agree with what Jill said. Suddenly we've got very senior management in the university are interested, and that could be something, and maybe that's influenced the US before us, I think. I can't answer it. But,
I'll just chime in as the only representative from the US on the stage right now. I think it's an especially interesting question given that there are virtually no functional mandates in the US, and that you actually have functional mandates in the UK, where you have a truly federal higher education system, which of course we don't have in the US. So the whole dynamic is just very complicated and very interesting, I think.
I should...
reasons why they haven't perhaps taken off as much in the UK. One of them, I think, is that generally the publishing community has done such a good job, there hasn't been a perceived need. I think there is an element of apathy, a concern about the costs and the infrastructure, and maybe not having the effort to devote to developing the business models, but it's actually changing now, and I think there will be more university press. We used to have one at Newcastle way back in the 60s, and it's interesting that there are discussions about resurrecting the presses, and I think the technology and the timing are right for us now, and they weren't before, whereas the presses that have survived and thrived in the UK have been the really long established ones, the ones like Oxford and Cambridge, Edinburgh, the old universities where that culture was there, they thrived, and the rest of us haven't really felt the need to venture. But I think that's changing.
I think I'd say something as well. It's a lot of this is actually driven by our faculty. I'm getting people coming to us. I haven't commissioned. I mean, I think we've, again, it's not huge scale. I mean, well, our library director sort of points at me and goes, "He's the university press." It's pretty much true. It's basically one of the things I do. I haven't commissioned any books, but I've got half a dozen books over the last 18 months from people that have come to me. And just something that I forgot to say, interestingly, this is the stuff that we're putting out on open access is all CC BY, and it's mostly led by historians. So don't believe what you read in evidence. We've got a history journal, will be CC BY, and we've put out a couple of things CC BY. So it's interesting, and it's being driven by those people.
Other questions? Yes, Richard. The aerobic workout continues.
Thank you, Graham. It's Richard Pavlick from Scientific. I'd like to take... I'd like to disagree with what you said about building flashy platforms, actually. I think you're missing the point, because I think the job of the publisher is to, in the context of technology anyway, as you know, I'm a technologist, is to provide access to that information in the most seamless, most flawless way possible. It's not about being flashy. it certainly is about making it work on mobile, but I think your advice to publishers to not build flashy platforms is a piece of poor advice, actually, because I think publishers need to think carefully about how to facilitate the discoverability and access of that information. And it needs to work on a mobile, but we know if you look at that in contrast to the way that most, if not all, institutional repositories work, they're not great. The usability is pretty poor, and frankly, they often don't work on mobile. So I think that that's not a great piece of advice, and you may or may not agree with me, but that's my perspective.
I agree with bits of that. I would say that flashy platforms and discovery are two totally different things, which is where I should plug the session tomorrow afternoon on discovery. Spend the money on metadata. Let people find it. I think they're two different things. We have found that with the repository, it's not. I mean, don't ever search a university repository. They're not built for that, but they are built for being found. In our case, on Google Scholar, Discovery Services, they come up there. We've done lots of tests, and we will appear just slightly below you on the same paper. So if people can't get the access, they can come to us. And then they just go straight through. Yes, the repository platforms are clunky, but the point is they're cheap and we can afford them, but they're discoverable, and I think that's a different thing.
Perhaps one more, then we'll go to the general. Andrew?
Hi, Audrey McCulloch, ALPSP. All three of the panellists have talked about partnerships and collaborations, one within the institution, and both Jill and Graham have spoken about partnerships with publishers. Are you able at this stage to articulate what those partnerships need to look like and what the products or solutions that need to be, the issues that need to be addressed by those partnerships are?
Shall I tip in? I think certainly the ones that I'm engaged with are very much premised around what I think has been often termed this total cost of ownership, that is looking very closely at the spending data on APCs and subscription costs, and actually engaging together on remodeling how this might actually work in a changed environment. There are certainly 2 or 3 publishers that I'm talking to about that, because I think it has to happen. Saying that they're two different things is just not the solution that's needed. And I think I have really welcomed the discussions that have been done with a high degree of openness. Yes, we're treating it as confidential at the moment, but it seems to me, rather than saying it cannot change, it cannot happen, and almost sometimes it's felt like being patted on the head and you don't really understand because you're not a business. Actually, we are businesses, and I think you'll find that most universities now, the sort of people that are coming in to run them are coming in with a business background, and we're being challenged in all sorts of ways about this. So I think it's really timely to just look at that and say, we respect and understand your need to work profitably, and even though we're charities, actually we've got a bottom line as well. And I fundamentally believe that you can still do that, but actually it has to change. So they're the sorts of things I'm doing, particularly around the open access side. And also, I would say, looking at the costs, the actual costs of delivering open access, because certainly with all the range of pricing models that I see, and I manage open access within our university, it is by no means clear to me where all these differential pricing things come in. I absolutely cannot, with an open mind, see where those costs come in. And I think looking at the drivers, whether post-Finch and the stuff that's coming through now with HEFKI, we do need to see some remodelling of that so there is greater consistency. So those are the sorts of things that I'm involved with, and I think it's going to be some really interesting work.
What Jill said, and I think just to say really that we have to have the conversation. I don't know whether we've really had it yet. Maybe this is the beginning. The price and everything that Jill said about price is important and bottom line, but I think to a certain point as well we have to step back from that a little bit and just have a look at what's happening and have that conversation. We can't always come back to price, although of course we will, but there are open access isn't going away, just like the e-journal didn't. I said traditional publishing now. I kind of did it with a tongue in my cheek, really, because I actually read something in one of the House of Lords evidence about OA saying this is disrupting traditional A&I databases. And I thought, what's traditional about a database? But apparently it is. I think we have to have the conversations and then kind of move on from there. And maybe pricing and things will fall into place. I know that's wishful thinking, but I think you have to have a discussion.
It's probably worth also saying that I think some of the most interesting conversations, although we tend invariably, fiscally or otherwise, to focus on journals, are around the scholarly monograph. Because I think one of my frustrations with a lot of the e-formats is that they haven't really fundamentally changed from print. Whereas I see a new generation of researchers coming through, I see a new generation of students, and not just the technological skills, but the way their minds work and think. We really, I think, collectively are failing to produce the formats that this generation really want to work with. So I think some of the things, and I think it would be easier with monographs than with journals because we haven't got such a long defined history of how we migrated from print to e. That's really where I think there could be a lot of innovation around the scholarly monograph. We've seen various models. I think a couple of years ago I was at a conference at the British Library that JISC hosted, and it was fantastic for all the ideas and things that were coming together there about how the models that could come through were really quite different from what we're seeing now. So I think that's another area where we may see some advancement, and it isn't all about the money, but I think it does come back a little bit to Graham's point about what do the community want and need. And I think on both sides, we sometimes forget that the really important people are the authors, because without them, none of us has got a role to fill. It's what they want and need and what they choose to do. We are servicing from both perspectives, whether it's the library or publishing. And I think it's going with them, seeing where they want to experiment. That's where we need to be.
So with that, could I have a round of applause for our panelists at the floor?